Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here are your co-hosts, Doug Lesmerises and Shehan Jeyarajah. And we're back on the College Football Survivor Show. Doug Lesmerises and Shehan Jeyarajah. And Shehan, we are here to change lives, change minds and change lives, which we're trying to do every podcast. But I don't know. Sometimes you're just talking about football, but we can make an impact here. This is something in college football that I think should change. I think very well could change, but I do think it needs a push, and I think it will make the sport better and have a historical impact on this sport that we love and the people listening to this podcast love. I don't want to overdo it, Sean. You know, there's other things that matter in life, right? Love, war, health, happiness, right? But the Heisman Trophy is in there somewhere on the list of the 100 things that matter most in the world. The Heisman Trophy is probably like 83rd. So if we are messing with the Heisman Trophy, which we're going to do for the next hour, how big a deal is this? Am I overstating the case that we are changing the fabric of the most important award in North American sports? And it's going to start here with us. This is a huge deal. This is the biggest thing that's ever happened on this podcast. Maybe one of the biggest things to happen in the last 25 years of college football. Am I overstating the case?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I'll pull it back, because what we want to do is we want to turn the Heisman Trophy into a postseason award. And we're going to discuss how that would have changed the voting this year. We're going to talk about how it might have changed the winners of the Heisman Trophy in the playoff era. And then I have reasons why I think this should happen. But let's get an idea of how much pushback I might get from you as we go through this. Do you, generally speaking, like this idea? Hate this idea? You're open to it? You need some persuading? You're almost there? You're just here to entertain my weird thoughts, cash a check, and get out of here, and you don't really care? Like, where are you? I am passionate about that. Where are you in this discussion?
Personally, I hate it. I think that it totally misunderstands what the award is. I think that you look across other sports, they have an award that is about the regular season and it's the most valuable player or whatever else. And then they have other awards to take into account the postseason. I personally am not a fan of this. I personally think that this devalues, just what the Heisman has meant historically. And probably the biggest thing that I do not like about this idea is that it ultimately means that to win the Heisman, you have to play for one of 4 teams. Now, obviously, it's going to expand to 12. But I think that, like, for example, somebody who I would, we're gonna do our postseason Heisman pick, and like put together our ballots. One player who I think maybe could have benefited, for example, is Michael Penix. Right, Michael Penix, he leads Washington to 11 wins. They win the Alamo Bowl. But is anybody looking at Michael Penix winning the Alamo Bowl and taking it all that seriously? Like, I don't think that's fair. Like, Michael Penix played for an awesome team that won 11 games, but like his postseason accomplishments won't matter because he didn't play in the playoff. The only players who are going to be considered are players who play in the playoff, and frankly, probably only players who make it to the national championship game. And we have a award for that. It's called winning a national championship. I don't think that we need to take the Heisman Trophy and take that out of the hands of players who aren't in the playoff or didn't play in the playoff or anything like that.
Okay, I accept this challenge. It hurts my heart a little bit. I thought you maybe were going to be with me from the start, but I like the idea. I'm going to try to persuade you of this over the next 57 minutes because I know what you're saying, but as it stands, Michael Penix finished 8th in the Heisman voting this year. So he already didn't get to New York. He already didn't get that much consideration. And the one important point is we're only doing this in a 12-team playoff world where you're expanding the playoff. And I think that is a huge component of this. I would start this with the 12-team playoff. We're entering a completely new era in college football. And so I think the Heisman needs to evolve with the sport. But I would argue if we want to use this Michael Penix example, we didn't think of He won the Alamo Bowl. Who would care about that in a Heisman race? Because it's not part of the Heisman race. I think in a world where Michael Penix, his team didn't make the playoff, but today in the Alamo Bowl against, I don't even know who they played. Who'd they play? Texas, San Antonio? Texas. In the Alamo Bowl, can Michael Penix make his Heisman case? Tune in. Michael Penix is here. It's been a great season. Can he put the capper to make his, which he doesn't get a chance. He didn't get a chance to do that. Now, I would argue if your point is a guy like Michael Penix doesn't have a chance at the Heisman in the new formula, I would argue he doesn't have a chance in the current formula. So let's give him a little extra boost.
I think that my point isn't that Michael Penix could have won the Heisman if people cared about the Alamo Bowl more. I think that my point is that this is a massive advantage that playoff participants will get that anybody who's not a playoff participant will not get. So, for example, back in 2016, Lamar Jackson's Louisville was really good, but are people giving Lamar Jackson the Heisman coming off of a really nice 10-win season if he's not playing in the playoff? Are people giving Robert Griffin back in 2011 the Heisman because they played in actually, funnily enough, the Alamo Bowl against, funnily enough, Washington? Nobody, I don't think anybody's looking at them like that. If then right after we play that game, then it's like, well, now AJ McCarron and whoever else is playing in the playoffs, so I guess we got to look at them because that's the game that we're actually all watching. I just think that ultimately it changes the award into effectively a most outstanding player award for the tournament, and I just think that's a completely different award than winning essentially National Player of the Year.
So I don't disagree. Let me run through the Heisman winners in the playoff era.
Yeah.
Team made the national championship game. Team won the national championship. Lamar Jackson. Team made the semifinal. Team made the semifinal. Team won the national championship. Team won the national championship. Team made the national championship game. And then Caleb Williams this year, who almost made it. So in the playoff era, 7 of the 9 Heisman winners were in the playoff. So I think you're arguing against something that already exists. And I would argue that I actually think you would potentially enhance the chances of the non-playoff players because the thing of it is, well, I have 5 arguments. I have 5 arguments and then a half argument at the end that I will outline that I will try to answer some of your questions. I'm going to sprinkle them in. Here's my first reason why I think the Heisman should move to the end of the season. And then we're going to immediately get to our postseason ballots for this year. How would it have changed our view? My number one thing is you brought up the idea that in other sports, they have a postseason award and the regular season award. They also break up the season. College football doesn't do that. All the stats are lumped together. And I think college football should either say it's a 12-game regular season, and then all this other postseason stuff is something different, or admit that it's all together and do the awards for the whole thing. So I think college football is more a whole thing than other sports are because everybody makes the, quote, playoff because of bowl season, because 66 teams make bowls. Everybody gets that extra game, which doesn't exist in other sports. You're cutting teams out. So for everybody, you are eliminating one of their team's games because everybody makes a bowl. And I don't think that makes sense. I don't think you should give an award where you're not counting everything that happens in a season. And do you at least agree with the idea that college football does smush everything together more than other sports do, where the NFL has a 16-game regular season and then a bunch of teams are done? Nobody's done. Nobody that matters is done. And I know you're going to bring up another point. And that's actually one of the other points that'll come up later. But you know what I mean? We do think, and this is not why I want to do it, but when you go back and you look at, hey, here's the stats of the Heisman winner. Well, you go, well, those weren't their stats when they won it because they gave out the award in the middle of the season. They gave out the award before the season was over. It is at least a little bit different, right? College football's all smushed.
Well, but go back to the history, and obviously, you were around during the creation of the sport, obviously, and you got to see, Army win all those titles and all that. So, when you go back to the history of the sport,
go Army.
Yeah. What are bowl games? They are exhibitions to reward a team at the end of the season. We didn't count bowl stats at all until what? It was like 2003, right? Like it was very recent, the idea that we should even consider a bowl game as a real football game. And I think that that is true to the idea of what a bowl game. And by the way, now we have players opting out of these bowl games, right? And I think that you look at this situation, and again, to go back to Michael Penix or whoever else, Bijan Robinson's not playing in that game. Roschon Johnson's not playing in that game. I don't think anybody would have the possibility to watch that game and say Michael Penix is making the same kind of case and has the opportunity to make the same kind of case in this game as other guys who we'll get to who played in the college football playoff.
So I think you're actually arguing for me that when the Heisman started, bowl games were exhibitions and vacations that nobody cared about. And now the games that are played after the Heisman is awarded are the most important games of the season for the best teams and a lot of the best players. So it made more sense for Mr. Inside and Mr. Outside, Doc Blanchard and Felix Jones. Well, I can't think of the other guy's name. It's not Felix Jones. But the two Army guys who won back-to-back, Felix Jones and Darren McFadden, they were the Arkansas guys. They weren't Doc Blanchard and the other guy. Glenn Miller? No, that was an orchestra guy. So anyway, my point is there was a time when anything you did after the Heisman was fluff, and that's not the case now. Right. So so I think you're almost arguing for me by saying, well, back when it started, the bowl games didn't matter. It's like, yeah, I know. And now they matter. So I'm going to run through all 6 of my things right now because I can't sprinkle, because I'm just going to make my case and then we'll see how it would affect it. We've had 9 Heismans. We've had 9 Heismans in the playoff era. I think this would have changed 2 winners, maybe 3. And it might only be 1. So if you're worried about like, well, you're changing the whole spirit of the award, you're actually not. But I think what you're allowing is the most important games to matter to the Heisman case. So here's my overall case, my 6 points. 1 is we count all the stats for someone's whole season. We don't break it up regular season and postseason. So we already have something that tells us college football is one big giant thing. And so when I look at the end, if we're going to count all the stats together, then let's count all the stats together when we do the Heisman. That's number 1. Number 2 is everybody plays an extra game. So everybody has a chance to make their case after the Heisman, unlike every other sport where there's a limited number of teams. Now, I understand, of course, that the playoff is different than bowl season, but still, you get a chance. You have one more game extra. It's not like guys are going to be sitting at home being like, man, I didn't get my chance. Number 3 is we already use part of the postseason for the Heisman because we use conference championship games where there are guys sitting at home. And guess what I say every year when we have a Heisman race? You've got to play on conference championship weekend or you're not going to win. Because I think that's proven out. So we're already part of the way there. Guess what? CJ Stroud hurt his Heisman chances because his team wasn't playing on conference championship weekend. Now, you would say, hey, well, then make the conference championship game and then maybe you won't be sitting at home. But now you're arguing for, hey, what about those guys who aren't in the playoff? It's not fair to them. What's the difference between not playing in the conference championship game and it hurting your Heisman chances and not playing in the playoff and it hurting your Heisman chances? We're already part of the way there. The only reason we do that is because of scheduling logistics, because the conference championship games are right after the end of the regular season. And the other games are not. But we acknowledge that that's different. That no one says that's the regular season, right? It's conference championship weekend, and it's more exclusive. It's much more exclusive than bowl season is. So I think that is a big deal. We're already part of the way there. You said guys sitting out. My number 4 thing is I think this gets guys to play or encourages them to play. Bijan Robinson, Michael Penix, anybody. Your bowl is now your last best chance to make your Heisman case. And as part of this, Shehan, I think everything should move. I think all American teams, I think every individual award. Why would you award anything before all the games are done? It's insane to me. So I don't know if that's fair or not. But if we live in a world where, well, why would a guy play in a bowl game? It's meaningless. His team can't win a title. There are guys who play for teams that can't win a title starting in week 2, and they keep playing. So now the very best players, you add extra incentive for them to play. Now, maybe bowl games can give them money. And if you decide not to play, if you still opt out, which all the best players do right now, you're still eligible for everything. It doesn't mean you're not going to be an All-American. It doesn't mean you're not going to win the Heisman or win the Thorpe Award or the Outland Trophy or anything else. It just means you have one less game. That's all. But I think it's an extra incentive because you give meaning back. They aren't fluffy exhibitions anymore. They're part of your season, which by awarding everything before those games, we take the value out of those games. Hey, you're an All-American. Now go play in the Alamo Bowl. So I think that's a big deal. The biggest deal is we're going to a 12-team playoff. So Archie Griffin in 1975, when he won his second Heisman, which is just a point I decided to use. Ohio State plays 11 regular season games and 1 bowl game. That's the world back then. So Archie Griffin plays 11 games, wins his second Heisman, then plays in the Rose Bowl. 8% of his season is not counted in his Heisman resume. Now we are running a world where a good team, if you make the conference championship game, and some won't. So you'll play 12 or 13 games, and then you might play 4 playoff games. So if you're a team that plays 13 regular season games, you notice I call the conference championship game, I'm lumping it in. I don't know what it is. You might only play 12, and then you play 4. That's 24% of your season that's not counted. So that world where we're going to have guys play potentially 3 or 4 playoff games, and none of it counts, is crazy to me. And if you're a team, actually, if you play 4 playoff games and only 12 regular season games, that's like a third of your season or whatever. It's like it's 25%. You're playing 16 games and 4 don't count. This is the driving force of this, Shehan. The 12-team playoff, you're going to be playing so many games that don't count. It's ridiculous to me. It completely is the game changer why I'm pushing this. And then the last thing is the half-point argument is if you don't want to do it, we'll just do a postseason Heisman. That maybe is cooler. And we'll call it the Vince Young Award. You want to win the Heisman? That's the thing during the regular season when it's like everybody. Now here's this exclusive club where you're playing a bunch of games. It's not the National Championship Award. It's the best player of the playoff. And I was watching the highlight of Vince Young running into the corner of the end zone in the Rose Bowl to beat USC at the end of the 2005 season in the game of the century. And I thought he did the little hop step as he crossed the goal line because I misremembered it. I was at that game. I misremembered it. He does a little hop step sort of as he gets to the first line of the crowd in the sideline after he scored the touchdown. As he's in the air in that celebratory hop step with the ball clutched in his right hand, that's my trophy, the Vince Young trophy. So Heisman, you can either be rendered not irrelevant, but now you've got to share the stage. He didn't win the Heisman, but he won the Young. You can either share it with the new postseason award brought to you by the College Football Survivor Show. I'll commission a trophy. What's it cost? $50? I don't know. I'll do that. You can either share the stage or you can encapsulate the entire season with your trophy. So the stats are already smushed together. Everybody plays an extra game. We're already using part of the postseason. You're going to get the stars have extra incentive to play in the bowls. The 12-team playoff, there's so many more games that are not going to be counted if you keep it the way it is. And by the way, we'll make a new trophy if you don't do it. Those are my 5.5 points. Boom. Thanks for listening to the College Football Survivor Show. Roast it. Persuasive? Is it persuasive or are you just like, shut up, Doug?
No, I mean, I think that the points are well taken. And actually, I think the last half point is the best point. We should have a most outstanding player of the college football
I knew you'd seize on my half point. Oh, yeah. We'll let Doug make up his own little award. Yeah, great.
No, I think, and I think that that's something that they can and honestly probably should do. But, you know, you mentioned one of the points that you mentioned is that there's less separation between the bowl games and the regular season in college football than in other sports. But I actually think that that's the opposite. There's 15 practices in a full month in between the regular season and the postseason. And obviously, like you said, the conference championship games are technically a point of the postseason that are taken into consideration. But it's a 1 week extension of the season versus a 7-week extension of the season. Game 12 of the regular season is played on November 25th or whatever it is. Game 1 of the playoffs is going to be played even in a 12-team world on like December 27th.
No, December 19th, 2021, the first year.
2024?
No, it'll be either December 19th, 20th, or 21 in the year 2024. So listen, because the calendar as it stands right now,
that does help.
This is what the calendar is going to be in the new world. Conference championship game weekend, the first weekend in December. Second weekend in December, hand out the Heisman.
Yeah.
Third weekend in December, start the playoff. That's the new calendar. So you're squeezing.
He's not going to be happy about that.
Well, but Army Navy doesn't matter for the Heisman thing. No offense to Doc Blanchard and Glenn Miller. Steve Tovar? No, I can't remember the guy's name. That's the world. And by the way, you're not even going to have time to go to the Heisman. But right now, it's like, oh, okay, well, let's make all the best players fly to New York and do like a photo shoot on Friday as they're potentially planning to play a first-round playoff game. It's ridiculous to smush the Heisman in the only open weekend between conference championship weekend and the first round of the playoffs. It's crazy to me. And there's going to be multiple players who are going to be in New York on that weekend when they should be prepping for the playoff because it's all one big season. So I think that argument does not hold water in the 12-team playoff world. It's not the same. Now, if you're playing a single bowl game, yes, there's going to be a bit of a gap there. But half those bowl games are in mid-December anyway. So I don't think we're used to that now. Hey, you get 41 days off. That's not the new world. That's not the new world. And to cram in, honestly, game, award ceremony for the best player, game. How does that make sense?
So here is probably my actual biggest issue with this proposal. So you obviously are a Heisman voter, so you can tell me about the Heisman voting process and how many people are involved and how many people who don't know what they're doing are involved. The amount of people who will not watch anything except for the very end of the national championship games. Because for example, when we talk about you have to play on conference championship weekend, a big part of it is because we know that a lot of these guys aren't watching these games.
So what's the difference then? It's already bad. Is it going to get worse?
A big part to me, because I think that we need to get to one, our ballots from this year in a postseason Heisman world, but two, I think we need to get to how the winners potentially would have changed in the playoff era. But I think that it just puts so much focus on the national championship game as the only thing that matters in the sports. Because I think you look back, right? 2022, for example, Caleb Williams wins the Heisman Trophy. I think very deserving Heisman Trophy winner, was the best player in college football this year, I'd argue. I don't think he wins it because he wasn't.
We can get to our ballots then. We can get to our ballots. So I think most of the things that you're arguing against exist now. The idea that people don't pay attention until the end of the year, the people that players on teams competing for the title have an edge and get more votes. Yes, that's already true. So why not acknowledge it more? And then why not give anybody who's not in those situations a last chance for a big, hyped up bowl game last Heisman chance, as opposed to Michael Penix's last opportunity to make a Heisman case was just like a regular season game in the Pac-12 that nobody watched. But now it's like, Mike, I don't disagree. And I think there are many things that should change about the Heisman. There's about 900 plus electors, all living Heisman winners. Plus there's a number of voters from each state. I think the way they pick those voters is bad. I think they have too many retired guys who aren't really covering the sport. There's too many people then who are covering the sport that are blocked out. I think you need to redo the whole system, which you have an opportunity to do. And I'm in agreement on all this. You need a probably smaller, more educated voting block, which is what we did with the sport. We went from 62 people in the coaches poll and 63 people in the AP poll and 6 different computer systems to a 13-person group to pick the playoff. We went from bigger to smaller, but unaware to more educated. I think the Heisman should do the same thing. I think you should have to earn your Heisman vote more. That's part 2 of the podcast. I am in complete agreement. But what we're dealing with now is the structure, the timing. And as the sport changes, I think that's most important award should change as well. We're going to now do the examples, starting with the most recent one, because that's going to tell you if this is a terrible idea or a decent idea. How much would change or not change? We'll do that next on the College Football Survivor Show.
Don't miss the College Football Survivor Show bonus episode this week. Available only on Apple Podcasts.
Offensively, Nick Saban has had 8 offensive coordinators since taking over at Alabama in 2007. Would you like to play Name That Saban Coordinator? Let's see how many of the 8 you can name.
Okay. Lane Kiffin.
Lane Kiffin is correct. He was the offensive coordinator for 3 years from 2014 to 2016.
Mike Locksley.
Mike Locksley was the coordinator for 1 year in 2018.
Brian Dabble.
He was a coordinator, now the head coach of the New York Giants after a long run with the Buffalo Bills.
Yes.
1 year in 2017.
Okay. Doug Nussmeier.
Doug Nussmeier, that's a hard one.
Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts for exclusive College Survivor Show bonus episodes.
Doug and Shehan are back. I am a Heisman voter. I've been so for about 10 years. You are not yet a Heisman voter. And again, the idea that you're not a Heisman voter is one of the things that's wrong with the system. My ballot, my actual ballot this year, was the order of finish. I went Caleb Williams 1, Max Duggan 2, CJ Stroud 3. And I did not consider voting for Stetson Bennett. When Stetson Bennett popped up as one of the finalists, I was like, should I have thought about him? I didn't think about him at all. And he finished 4th. So that's my actual ballot. What would, if you had a vote, which you should have, and we're working on it, what would your vote have been in December?
Yeah, I would have gone Caleb Williams 1, Max Duggan 2, and I would have gone Hendon Hooker 3.
Okay. So let's talk about what these guys did to make their case or not make their case after these games were played. So let's start with Caleb Williams, who did play in his bowl game, right? Did play against Tulane, did not win, but 37 of 52, 462 yards passing, 5 touchdowns in a 46-45 loss to Tulane. This is a very good example. We are doing, I think this is because the other 3 finalists were all in the playoff. Right. It's 3 playoff quarterbacks. And then this guy who barely missed the playoff, had a chance to get in the playoff, didn't, barely missed it, but then does play in his bowl game and lights it up. What do you think that effort did for Caleb Williams' postseason Heisman chances, Shehan?
I think he would have lost any chance to have the award because USC lost the game.
I completely disagree with that. See, now I think you are a guy who doesn't want, you are an advocate, and I made you be on a playoff show. You are an advocate for the full-throated, across the board, coast to coast, California to Florida, Mexico to Canada, from the SEC to Conference USA. Every single team matters. You are that guy in college football, I think, as much as anybody out there. Because there are some people who only care about the best teams, me. There are some people who are the group of 5 people, right? But you are top to bottom, 1 to 131, I think, as educated about the entire sport as anybody in the country. I honestly think that, and I'm not just saying that to get a couple extra listeners on the podcast. Hey, come listen to this guy. He's the best guy. I really think that. We were lucky to find you. I truly think that. I think you're, in this case, you are always, I think, defending, I don't know if I want to say the little guy, but the person out of the spotlight. You're always standing up for them. And I think here you are overestimating how much this is a USC quarterback who played in a very high profile game and put up great stats. You think he would have no chance? He was a pretty overwhelming winner. You think he would have no chance of winning?
I think that his odds would have gone down tremendously, because I think that the narrative that came from that game was not that, and the Heisman's a narrative award. We've spoken about that before, and that's not a problem. It's a narrative award. But the narrative coming from that game was, what a failure by USC.
By USC, not by him. But
this is where these things get intertwined. That's why Stetson Bennett was a Heisman finalist, is because they were the best team in the country. And people were like, well, we obviously got to vote somebody who's from the best team in the country. These things are absolutely intertwined, which is one of my big issues with it then becoming a playoff award, is that the success of their teams is going to be 100% intrinsic to how people vote for the award, because they don't actually want to watch the games in the regular season.
But they do want to, but they're all going to watch these games at the end. They're all going to watch these games at the end. I am surprised. I don't agree with this. I think this is like the perfect case of how a guy not in the playoff still has a very, very compelling Heisman case, because what he then went and did in his very competitive high-level bowl game confirmed everything he did during the regular season. When what did he do during the regular season? He was the very high-achieving, talented, highlight-heavy, skilled quarterback of a non-playoff team. And he still won persuasively. It was not that close. He got 544 first-place votes. Max Duggan got 188. He had 2,031 points. Max Duggan had 1,420. So I think this is a persuasive case, but let's get to our ballot. So let's talk about the guy who finished second, Max Duggan, who again is, so I'm going to be curious how you work this, because you're now standing up for like the little known USC Lincoln Riley quarterback. But now Max Duggan, who did finish second behind Caleb Williams, he gets to the playoff against Michigan, 14 of 29, 225 yards. 2 passing touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 15 carries, 57 yards, 2 touchdowns. And then Georgia in the national title game, 14 of 22, 152, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 10 carries. He got sacked 5 times, so he had negative rushing yards. What do you think happens to Max Duggan's Heisman case if it's a postseason Heisman?
So I think I have to talk about this in the context of how this all would finish.
Okay, so you want to go to the other guys? Let me get the other guys' stats. Let's do it all. CJ Stroud finishes third. He's 23 of 34 for 348, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions against Georgia in a semifinal. Kind of runs the ball for the first time all year that people are waiting for. 12 carries for 34 yards, but had a couple big runs. And then Stetson Bennett, who a lot of people were offended was a Heisman finalist, was there instead of Hendon Hooker. Stetson Bennett against Ohio State, 23 of 34, 398 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Against TCU in the national title game, 18 of 25, 304 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. Also has 3 rushing touchdowns in those 2 games. Total, 723 total offensive yards, 10 total touchdowns, 1 pick. It is his total yards, rushing and passing combined. His best. The Ohio State game was his best game of the year in total yards, and the TCU game was his 3rd best game of the year. The only one better in between was the opener against Oregon. So he had his 2 best games since the opener on the biggest stage against the best opposition. So that's what Stetson Bennett, guy who people mocked as a Heisman finalist, that's what he did for the best team against the best competition when it mattered the most. So I can't decide, and he's a walk-on. He's 50, but he's a walk-on. So I don't know where you're going to land on. You want to defend the little guy, which you embraced. I'm not sure who the little guy is here. Who's the little guy that you are going to stand up for and say a postseason Heisman is unfair to him? So we've laid it all out now. Go ahead and defend it first, and then give us your ballot, your postseason ballot.
I guess maybe the way to, frame it more is less, in this case, defending the little guy, and more attacking who's apparently now the big guy. I don't think that after this playoff, anybody except for Stetson Bennett has a chance to win the Heisman. I think that Stetson Bennett
disagree.
is the runaway Heisman winner if this happens after the season. Absolute runaway. He played his 2 best games of the season, like you mentioned, because people did not watch Stetson Bennett all that closely during the regular season when he was fine. But he played his 2 best games in the college football playoff. Georgia obviously won both those games. The last thing that people remember from this is the best game of Stetson Bennett's career when he scored 6 touchdowns in a 65-7 win over TCU. I think that game erases any goodwill that Max Duggan had because everybody watched the national championship game. And I think that Stetson Bennett absolutely runs away with this award if it's a postseason award. And he was not the best player across the season.
So, but here's the thing. Here's the thing when we get into like, well, what about this game? Why'd they forget about this game? People forgot about Caleb Williams going 16 of 36 for 180 in a 17-14 win against Oregon State in September, right? They forgot about that. Like they forgot that he was 188, 15 of 29 for 188. Everybody has up games and down games.
To be fair, it was because it was on the Pac-12 network. Nobody could even watch that game.
But the idea that everybody has big games and lesser games, right? And if you have, it sounds like, so Stetson Bennett, was he as good all year as he was in the 2 playoff games? No. But does it make sense that Stetson Bennett's 2 best games that occur on the biggest stage with the most pressure, when his team needs him the most, against the best competition, they don't count? Why does that make sense? Why does it make sense to not count Stetson Bennett's best games, but Caleb Williams throwing for 470 yards against UCLA in November, that does count? What's the rationale other than, well, one's the regular season, one's the postseason, whatever. But we also, again, it's the smush argument. It seems like you want to say, well, you shouldn't just take Stetson Bennett's most high-profile best games into account, except high-profile best games is what wins guys the Heisman every year, because you point to their best game and say, oh, that guy in that game. It's a highlight. It's a narrative. That's the other thing. It's one of the other things I forgot to put in my thing. It's a narrative award. I agree with you. We talked about that. It's a narrative award that you hand out before the book's done. I don't understand why shouldn't Stetson Bennett's best games on the biggest stages count a lot instead of count 0?
So what I want fundamentally is, right now we ask voters to evaluate a body of work games 1 through 13. Right. Like, and especially I think that there's actually in some ways a beauty to the idea that these guys don't necessarily play each other in the regular season, that they're doing their own thing. Caleb Williams and Max Duggan and Stetson Bennett and CJ Stroud did not play against each other in the regular season. And I think that once you get to the postseason, when you have these situations, it just becomes a quarterback wins award, right? Like your quarterback beat my quarterback and therefore this player's eliminated. Like, that's what happens. That's what happens, I think, here. And I think that completely eliminates anything that happened before this quarterback beat this quarterback. And fundamentally, like, I'm sorry, did we expect Max Duggan to play as well against Georgia as Stetson Bennett would have against TCU with Georgia players versus TCU players?
But then why should Max Duggan finish second in the Heisman then? So you are advocating for less context. This is a regional argument for what was a regional sport and is no longer a regional sport. You want the votes to come down to what everybody does in their own individual silo, not against each other, with no context of what a TCU quarterback would actually look like against Georgia or what a Georgia quarterback would look like against TCU. I don't. Why is that better? Why is it better to be in your own little world? And then we, as uneducated Heisman voters, have to try to decide, well, what does that mean in the Big 12 versus what that means in the SEC versus what that means in the Big 10? Why is that better?
Because I think it's fundamentally a narrative award. And I think that when we get to a point where, again, there are 3 teams. We talk about it repeatedly. There are 3 teams doing things that nobody else is doing, right? Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia. In any one-on-one situation against these teams, the other team's going to lose. Like, most likely, more times than not, the other team is going to lose. There's obviously exceptions, but do we want to be in a position where this becomes a quarterback wins award? Like, that's the worst way to me to look at football, and I don't trust the voters, and I don't trust our college football narrative machine to view it as anything other than that.
But it seems like you're making a Max Duggan argument to me, that you want Max Duggan.
I would not have voted Max Duggan. I wouldn't have voted Max Duggan.
But you voted Max Duggan second in your regular season ballot.
Yes.
All right, let's just go to our postseason ballot so we can talk about how it would have changed. Okay, so your original ballot, say it again, what your regular ballot would have been.
My regular ballot would have been Caleb Williams, Max Duggan, Hendon Hooker.
Okay, and what would your postseason ballot have been?
Yeah, if we were doing 3, I would have had Caleb Williams 1. I would have had Stetson Bennett 2 and Max Duggan 3.
Okay. I had Caleb Williams 1, Max Duggan 2, CJ Stroud 3. My postseason ballot would have been Caleb Williams 1, Stetson Bennett 2, CJ Stroud 3. So we would be 2 of the voters in this modern thing. What we did was we both moved up Stetson Bennett because guess what? We had his 2 best games as part of his resume. And we went from, that guy's no Hendon Hooker to, oh my gosh, that guy led the go-ahead touchdown drive in the final 2 minutes of a semifinal to keep their chances alive, right? That guy made plays. Did anyone walk away from the playoff and think, I was stupid that Stetson Bennett was a Heisman finalist, which is what people were saying when he was there, right? Didn't that argument get like, hey, that guy's a good player? I'm not saying he should have won. Neither of us are. But didn't he bolster himself? Didn't he make a persuasive case like, yeah, no, that guy's a legit Heisman candidate? Do you think he did that in the playoff?
I think that's fair to say. Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair to say, but I just don't view it as a postseason award.
Okay, so you're back. So here's the thing. Here's the thing why I still voted for Caleb Williams. His case didn't change. He's individually awesome. His team is not quite good enough as a playoff team. But the case that he made, the fundamental case that he made when he won it, didn't change because he went to his bowl game. And if he would have been hurt or opted out, he still might have won. But hey, throwing for 5 touchdowns and 400 plus yards in your bowl game certainly helped. In the end, yards from scrimmage per game, all games included, Caleb Williams 351, CJ Stroud 292, Stetson Bennett 288, Max Duggan 275. So there's still a statistical thing where it's like, listen, man, this one guy is just head and shoulders above the rest of the competition when it comes to like sort of producing on a game by game basis. I don't think people would completely wipe it out. The other thing I would make sure you do is you've got to give people time after the national championship game. You can't ask for their ballots at noon the next day. You've got to let them decompress a little bit and give people like 3 or 4 days. And you've got to send the message. It's a full season award, right? We'll send it. I'll send them here. It's a full season award still, which it is not now. It's a full season award. Don't only count the playoff, but certainly, does the playoff count a lot? Heck yes. It's the most important games against the best competition. So I think the example here of what changes is Max Duggan finished second. And if Caleb Williams didn't exist, Max Duggan would have won the Heisman. And if Max Duggan had won the Heisman after the playoff, I think people would have been like, I don't know about that one, because CJ Stroud performed better against that Georgia defense than Max Duggan did. And Stetson Bennett was rolling for 2 games on the way to the national title. At the moment, I voted Max Duggan second and didn't think about Stetson Bennett. And then after the playoff, what is their full body of work, right? What is there that would tell you Max Duggan is more deserving than Stetson Bennett? I don't think there's anything. And you and I both changed our vote. Now, it doesn't matter as much because we both still had Caleb number 1. But that example, to me, Stetson Bennett instead of Max Duggan, I want the playoff in that conversation.
So, but then let me ask you this, okay? In the regular season, We see CJ Stroud play against Michigan and get beat and not play all that well. And then we see Max Duggan with, by the way, a worse team and worse teammates go and beat that same Michigan team. So what's the argument then for CJ Stroud being number 3?
The argument is full body of work. The argument is, why does CJ Stroud's not good game against Michigan count and Max Duggan's good game against Kansas State when they still lost, that counts, but then the playoff doesn't count? The argument is, I won it all. The argument is, I won it all. So if I'm close then on Duggan and CJ, and maybe I'm close, but why should CJ Stroud's best game, CJ Stroud changed people's opinions about him with the way he played against what has been the best defense in the country for the last 2 years. It's not the only thing, but he had solid stats. He was a winning quarterback. You want to count the Michigan game because it counts, but why not count the Georgia game? You're saying, we do count that Michigan. It's counted. But why not count the other? We did count Max Duggan's best stuff, but why not count it when his team got their doors blown off in the national title game? I just don't. It does count. It does count.
I think that I can reduce this for me down to one fundamental thing. I think that when I look at the sports and when I look at these individual teams and when I look at these individual players, I see a situation where you have to contextualize what these guys did with what they have, right? Stetson Bennett has the best team in college football next to him. CJ Stroud has one of the best receiver corps of all time playing next to him. So it's like, but when we get to the playoff, we look and say, well, CJ Stroud played better against Georgia's defense than Max Duggan did. And it's like, and I don't think Max Duggan should have won the thing, to be clear, but like, well, yeah. Do you think that it might have helped Max Duggan if he was throwing to Marvin Harrison and Emeka?
We just had a conversation how Quentin Johnston is going to be the first receiver off the board. He did throw to Marvin Harrison. His name's Quentin Johnston.
Would Ohio State fans have swapped starters 2 through 22 on their roster for teams? No, but answer that question. Would they have swapped players 2 through 22 on their roster?
But your idea of. But your context of penalizing good players for being surrounded by good players, you do that in the regular season. You do that all year long. What changes about including the playoff games? This is your argument always. Hey, this guy has lousy teammates. This guy has awesome teammates. So don't give as much credit to the guy with good teammates. How does adding the playoff games?
Why would you ever consider for the next 10 years giving the Heisman to anybody who doesn't play with the other best players on Ohio State or Georgia or Alabama? Why would anybody else?
But it's already happening.
It's not, though. It's not.
In the playoff era, seven of the 9 winners of the Heisman in the playoff era have been in the playoff.
But let's go back, okay? Let's go back and look at the entire Heisman era Heisman winners. So 2014, Marcus Mariota.
Okay, we're going to do that. Okay. We're going to do that. Okay. I have that. Okay. And we're going to finish up by doing that. And it'll help make the case, pro or con. And we'll do it next on the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
All right, we're back. We had to interrupt our heated discussion. So I as Shehan starts to do this, I sketched this out. I think 2 winners of the 9 change. And maybe a third, but that's all. So we will go year by year here. 2014 is perhaps the most interesting case. So go ahead with what you want to say. Let's start in 2000. We'll run through every year very quickly again to make this case of what would change. Go ahead.
Okay, so starting in 2014. 2014 is interesting because Marcus Mariota, 100% games 1 through 15 is the best player in college football. 100%. But in the playoff, Ezekiel Elliott turns into something that he was not during the entire regular season once the lights come on. And I think that there is a pretty good chance that people look and say, well, Ezekiel Elliott beat Marcus Mariota, and therefore let's give him the Heisman Trophy.
So Ezekiel Elliott did not finish in the top 10 in the regular season. Ezekiel Elliott ran for more than 200 yards in all 3 postseason games, one of which counted in the Heisman resume in the Big Ten championship game against Wisconsin. Then he also did it against Alabama and Oregon, did not finish in the top 10. Melvin Gordon from Wisconsin was the Big Ten running back who was the Heisman candidate that year. He had a 400-yard rushing game against Nebraska.
So he finishes with like 2,500 rushing yards. Ezekiel Elliott finishes with like 1,800 or so. Melvin Gordon's 400-yard game against Nebraska counts. Ezekiel Elliott's 200-plus yard games against Alabama and Oregon don't count. So that Heisman voting is Mariota, Melvin Gordon, Amari Cooper. Ezekiel Elliott's not in the top 10. He won the Sullivan Award that year as the best amateur athlete in college sports, which is kind of like a made-up award, too. It's like, hey, is it a shot put person or is it a college running back? So he won that. He wasn't sniffing the Heisman. So you're saying this is one of the ones of the two that I think may be the winner. I think it is possible Ezekiel Elliott wins the Heisman instead of Marcus Mariota. I agree with you. Why is that bad?
So games 1 through 15, Marcus Mariota is just better across 15 games. Ezekiel Elliott rushed for under 70 yards in 5 of his first 7 games. Like, he was a relative non-factor. And then obviously Ohio State was like, well, I guess it's actually good to give the ball to our best player. But it didn't happen until the last 3 games of the year in a 15-game season. And obviously at the end of the year, Ezekiel Elliott was playing as well as anybody. But to me, if this is supposed to be a 1 through 15 award, 1 through 15, I don't think that you can seriously make an argument that Ezekiel Elliott was as good in games 1 through 10 as Marcus Mariota. And Marcus Mariota, again, fundamentally was not the reason that Oregon lost that football game, but he would have been credited as the reason that Oregon lost that football game with this setup.
So we're agreeing that Ezekiel Elliott's postseason, I still have, you mostly think, let me ask this. If you trusted the voters, because neither of us trust the voters, a lot of your arguments are people aren't going to remember the regular season. People are going to overcount the postseason. Marcus Mariota was great in games 1 through 10, but also the games do get more important at the end. I mean, by definition. So I think counting the most important games more is okay. You know, if someone puts up 500 passing yards against Idaho State, I don't know. I don't count that as much as if they put up 500 passing yards against a good Pac-12 opponent. So if you trusted the voters, and we'll try to fix that too, would you be more open to this? Or do you believe that no person, even though you and I both still gave the Heisman postseason to Caleb Williams, and we both put Stetson Bennett second, which was moving him up based on the postseason. We both did that, but we didn't overdo it. We didn't give him the award instead of Caleb Williams. You and I both, I think, came to probably what we agree, we do agree, is the right conclusion. It's still Caleb Williams, but Stetson Bennett deserves to be higher. We did it. If everybody was like us, would you be okay with this? Or would you still fundamentally, is there part of you that believes that's not what this should be?
If we were able to do a 13 person in a room type setup to decide the Heisman, then I think that we could have a discussion. I don't think that there's any scenario where I trust a bunch of people submitting a blind ballot to pick the right thing and not just remember the very last thing that they just saw.
So conference championship weekend does matter. I say now it is not a race. It's not a Heisman race. It's a Heisman stage. And I believe that you have to get yourself to the stage and then you have to show out on conference championship weekend. So I believe that's how it already is. Do you disagree that that is sort of how it works now?
So I definitely agree. The question that I'd have is, would Ezekiel Elliott in 2014 have earned himself in the regular season the stage to make his Heisman case in 2014? Because fundamentally, I think that nobody voted him right. He didn't finish top 10 in the Heisman voting in 2014 because he hadn't earned the stage with his regular season performances yet. It would have only been a fundamentally recency bias postseason award if he were to then jump from outside of the top 10 to number 1.
So Kyler Murray beat Tua Tagovailoa in 2018 because he was better on conference championship weekend. That was a recency. Tua was better the course of the year. Tua was ahead the whole time. Last year, 2 years ago, when Bryce Young won, CJ Stroud after week 11 was in the lead. I don't think anybody disagreed with that. He threw 6 touchdown passes against Michigan State. He was in the lead. Ohio State loses to Michigan, doesn't make the Big Ten championship game. Bryce Young, they stumble to a win. He saves them against Auburn in the last weekend of the regular season, and then they beat Georgia in the conference championship game, and he wins it. What's the difference there? The 11 games, full body of work at CJ Stroud. And then recency bias, end of the year, most important games, your rivalry game and your conference championship game, Bryce Young was better or CJ Stroud wasn't even there. How is that different than somebody who's in the playoff and not in the playoff, or someone who's great in the playoff and someone who's average in the playoff? A lot of the things to me that you are arguing are already the case. You want it to be a full season award. It's not. It is recency bias. It is biggest games. It is biggest stages. So I'm just leaning into that because to me, it doesn't make sense that Kyler Murray can win the Heisman in a conference championship game, but Stetson Bennett can't win it in the playoff. We're already part of the way down that line, aren't we?
Well, I think that something that impacts me is that I think that winning a conference championship game matters a lot. I think that winning a conference championship should matter a lot. I think it's something that we should reward.
You know what else matters? Winning the national title.
But it's a completely different race. Like I think that one of my big issues with it is that with the way the sport works right now, there are numerous pathways you can take to making yourself a Heisman contender. Now, again, a lot of them terminate on that last weekend, but I don't think it even necessarily has to be the case. But I think that when we enter a world where we have a postseason Heisman, there is exactly one pathway that you can take to winning the Heisman. There's no outside path. There's no unique path. There's no individual excellence. Like, it is your team goes and you'll win a couple of games and you play for a national championship. I think that becomes the only way to win the Heisman Trophy at that point.
Even though you and I both just voted for Caleb Williams for the postseason.
I absolutely think that Caleb Williams does not win this year. I think Stetson Bennett wins in any group of voters. I don't think that, I'm thrilled that the two of us came to the right conclusion. I think that we are massive outliers in the way that this would have been. I absolutely think so. Caleb Williams ended his season on a quote-unquote low from a team perspective. Stetson Bennett ended his with obviously his, scoring 6 touchdowns. And people would look at that and say, wow, USC did not deserve to produce a Heisman winner this year. And it wouldn't even really be about Caleb Williams. It would be about how the teams and quarterbacks are inexorably linked.
Okay. So I think this Ezekiel Elliott 2014 example is an outlier also, because this is a guy who didn't even finish in the top 10, goes nuts at the end of the season. I think he does finish in the top 3 at the very least, and probably should. I mean, he ran for 1,800 yards. I mean, it's not like he didn't run for 8 yards a game and then go crazy. He was good, not great. Then he was great. All right. 2015, Derrick Henry wins. Alabama wins the national title. Christian McCaffrey second. Deshaun Watson is third. I voted for Deshaun Watson that year. But Derrick Henry wins it again, right? There's no doubt about that.
Easily.
So this is the next one. This is the one that I think almost definitively changes.
Oh, absolutely changes.
And the question is, are you mad about it or do you like it? So 2016, Lamar Jackson wins it in the individual excellence category. How do you win it? What's the example of your team's good, not great, but you're individually excellent? What does that look like? It's Lamar Jackson in 2016. Deshaun Watson second. Deshaun Watson in the playoff then goes 23 of 36 for 259 against Ohio State. Okay, 31-0 shutout, blows them out of the water, but then goes crazy in the national title game. 36 of 56, 420 passing yards, 3 touchdowns to beat Alabama in the national championship game. This is the Vince Young case. I think the 2 biggest examples of guys that I think are college football legends who did not win Heismans and should have and would have if there was a postseason Heisman. Vince Young, who actually we didn't dig into this. I want to make a trophy for him, but Vince Young was not close to Reggie Bush in 2005. It was nowhere close. And then they go head-to-head in the national title game, and Reggie Bush is good, but Vince Young is through the roof. That year, Reggie Bush gets 784. This is the 2005 regular season. Gets 784 first-place votes. Vince Young gets 89 first-place votes. And then it's a one-game, game of the century national championship. Vince Young throws for 267, runs for 203 touchdowns. 19 carries, 200 yards, 3 touchdowns, including the game winner on 4th down in the final minute. 467 total yards. It's his second best game of the season. Reggie Bush in that game, Lendale White is actually their leading rusher. Reggie Bush is 13 for 82, but he also has 9 catches for 95. So he has 170 plus yards from scrimmage. He's very good. But no way is it 784 to 89 in first place votes. And maybe, I don't know, maybe Reggie Bush still wins. But
no,
for Vince Young,
zero chance.
So is that wrong?
I think it is a different award. Like, it is a different thing that you're asking. Because here's
it's
the thing,
a better
too.
award. It's different. It's better because it counts all the games.
Here's the question, too. Everything's exactly the same. Vince Young has 450 plus yards, and it's 4th and 5, and Vince Young gets 4 yards, and USC wins the national title. Does Reggie Bush win the award?
Probably.
So that's dumb to me. That's dumb.
But we can't pretend I think you're extracting team success from the award too much. You can't acknowledge.
I think that it is completely tied. I think they are completely tied.
But you think it shouldn't be at all? You think it should be 0?
No, not at all. But I think that team success should be one component of it, and making it a postseason Heisman to me completely intertwines them. Completely intertwines them.
So Lamar Jackson wins in 2016. Deshaun Watson is second. And we agree that Deshaun Watson wins.
Yeah.
In a world where the postseason. And that's bad. Now, this is tough because I think Lamar's Heisman case is spectacular. But I also think Deshaun Watson's Heisman case is spectacular. And I think Deshaun Watson should have a Heisman. Again, I've said this before. I voted for him twice. I voted for him in 15 when he finished 3rd, and I voted for him in 16 when he finished 2nd. Because in that moment, I was valuing his team's success because all I knew in that moment was he's the quarterback of a national championship contender. We don't know how it's going to play out. There are other great players. Derrick Henry is great. Christian McCaffrey's great. Lamar Jackson is great. But Deshaun Watson is also great, and he plays the most important position and is the most valuable to this excellent team. So I'm factoring in team success. And then once you give that team a national championship that is fueled by his 420 passing yards, of course he wins. And that to me is better. Yes, it's different, but it's better.
Do you think that if Lamar Jackson is quarterback of Clemson in 2016, that they could have won the national championship?
I don't know. Maybe yes. Do you think that Lamar Jackson in 2016 was a better individual player than Deshaun Watson, or did he just put up bigger stats because he didn't have any good teammates?
I think that he was individually better than Deshaun Watson, and I think he was across the course of the season. And don't get me wrong, I don't think it would have been egregious by any means for Deshaun Watson to win that award. I just think it would have been disappointing that it's because there's only one pathway to winning the award. That a Lamar Jackson case becomes impossible.
Nope,
completely
it's not impossible.
Completely impossible. Absolutely
those are
impossible.
In the playoff era. Those are, and I did this while you were gone in December. I did after Caleb Williams won the Heisman. I did a pod here for our College Football Survivor Show listeners, where I ranked the best overall Heisman candidates in the entire playoff era. And Caleb Williams was like 14th. So one of the things about Caleb Williams wouldn't have won this year. It was not a good Heisman year. It wasn't.
No, I think that's totally fair.
Deshaun, so the idea of how could we rip the Heisman away from Caleb Williams? It's well, I don't know. I mean, it's fine. Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson are 2 of the best 5 Heisman candidates in the playoff era. They just happen to be in the same year. So at the moment, it's I think Deshaun Watson got unfairly aced out of a Heisman. So now we're creating a world where you would feel like Lamar Jackson would get unfairly aced out of a Heisman. But at least we'd count all the games. Let's go to 2017. Baker Mayfield in 2017, he wins it. He's throws for 287, 2 touchdowns and a pick in the overtime playoff loss to Georgia. Bryce Love is second. Lamar Jackson is third. Baker still wins in 2017, right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
2018, we'll get back to in a second because it's the last interesting one. 2019, Joe Burrow wins 6 Heismans if they count the postseason. He's the Heisman-y that you could ever have. Right. So that doesn't change. Right. 2020, Devontae Smith is awesome all year long and is awesome in the playoff. No doubt about it. Devontae Smith still wins it. And then 2021, Bryce Young carries Alabama the whole year and then drags Alabama to the national championship game. That doesn't change.
I don't think that changes.
You do think your official stance is, even though you and I both voted for Caleb Williams, you think Stetson Bennett would have won the postseason Heisman. That's your official stance.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you think that one changes. I think Caleb Williams still wins. So let's get our official stances here. So you have Caleb Williams changing to Stetson Bennett. 2014, do you think Ezekiel Elliott actually wins? Derrick Henry doesn't change. Lamar Jackson to Deshaun Watson, we think that actually changes.
Yes.
2017 doesn't change. And then 19, 20, and 21 don't change. So you have 3 changes. I have 2. The last one, and I think this would have been great. 2018, it's Tua Tagovailoa's award. It's there for the taking. Kyler Murray has a great Big 12 championship game, wins the award on conference championship weekend. And then guess what? They play in the semifinal. It's Tua versus Kyler Murray. But the awards have already been voted for. So that idea, Shehan, I don't know how that would have gone down, but I think I'm here for Tua versus Kyler in a semifinal, and also it's for the Heisman. Tua in that game, 24 of 27, 318 passing yards, 4 touchdowns. Kyler Murray in that game, 19 of 37 for 308 yards, 2 touchdowns, also ran 17 times for 109 yards. So Tua only had 3 incompletions, was basically perfect. Kyler had 400 plus yards from scrimmage total. Bama wins 45-34. So Tua wins the head-to-head battle. That was a close Heisman anyway. How do you think Tua beats out Kyler in 2018 if it's a postseason award? And then, by the way, Bama goes on and gets blown off the field by Clemson in the national championship game, but nobody's given the Heisman to freshman Trevor Lawrence.
First of all, I think that Trevor Lawrence absolutely becomes a factor if that happens. Absolutely, because he would have played his 2 best games in the games that people watched. And I think that Trevor Lawrence absolutely has a chance. I don't know if he wins. I'm not as confident as I was about Zeke or about Stetson Bennett, but I think there's absolutely a very realistic chance. People are like, well, Trevor Lawrence was perfect over the 2 games that mattered, and he won the national championship, so he should be our Heisman winner. And he was a freshman. It took him some time to get his sea legs under him, but by the end of the year, nobody was playing any better. And I think that absolutely is a discussion. But the other part of it too, to go back to the Tua versus Kyler discussion, can anybody seriously watch that game and say, wow, Kyler Murray failed and Tua succeeded, and therefore that's why we're switching the Heisman? No, it's because Alabama won the game. That's it. It's only a quarterback wins award at that point, and I think that Tua does win at that point.
But Tua had been ahead, but you're okay. Do you have a problem that Kyler passed Tua on conference championship weekend by having a better game?
I mean, I would disagree. I think that Kyler was as good as not better across the whole season before that too. I think that Kyler was that good all season long. And I think that's probably where we differ most. I don't think that Tua...
He wasn't going to win. He wasn't going to win. Tua was going to win.
To me, it was a correction. I think that Kyler was that good all year. And people just didn't notice until he earned himself that stage. And, so I don't know. I mean, I just don't want this to become a quarterback wins award. Like, I just don't want this to become a quarterback wins award. That's fundamentally what it comes down to. And, like, of course Alabama beat Oklahoma. Alabama's better than Oklahoma. Of course Georgia beat TCU. Georgia's better than TCU. Like, I don't know what this tells us about these players. I don't think that it tells us anything that interesting or valuable.
You act though that like the great players on the great teams that you could just put in any other, well, if you put Max Duggan on Ohio State and he had Emeka Egbuka and Marvin Harrison Jr., he'd be CJ Stroud. So we should give Max Duggan the way that you overemphasize worse teams. Like one of your categories is how terrible are your teammates? And then I'm going to give you extra points because you are lifting this terrible team, as opposed to you are leading a great team and your play is making all the great players around you better. I understand wanting to stand up for the little guy, but you're kicking the big guy right in the groin repeatedly for being a big guy.
I don't know. It's like if you have great players around you, I think that your bar for greatness is higher. I don't think that you can just compare these guys apples to apples. I think that you have to contextualize what these guys are doing. Like, can you believe that Lamar Jackson didn't win as much as Louisville as Deshaun Watson did at Clemson? Yes, I absolutely can understand that because they are in completely disparate situations. Now, again, they're examples. For example, 2019, Joe Burrow, LSU, right? He has lots of talent around him and he plays like it. And he, like you said, elevates all that sort of stuff. But like, it's not just because they won the games. It's because they did what they did and won the games. And he was as good as he was. Like, I absolutely think that whenever we have players who play on great teams, we need to contextualize them versus other players within the context of what their teams have.
And you think it fundamentally changes? Because part of the deal, right? So Tua got hurt in the SEC championship game, I think, that year. And then Jalen Hurts came in because Tua was 10 of 25 for 164 yards with 2 picks in that SEC championship game. So if you think Kyler's better the whole year, what did happen is Tua was 387 versus Texas A&M. He was 334 against Arkansas. He was 306 versus Tennessee. He was 324 against Auburn in the rivalry game. And then the SEC championship game, he's bad. He gets hurt. It's the last game people saw, and he loses the Heisman. So that's okay. But then for him to throw 318 yards passing and 4 touchdowns against Oklahoma, that it's okay that doesn't count. Like, again, I understand your recency bias and don't just count the last game. Tua lost the Heisman because he had a bad last game. His worst game of the year was the last game on the biggest stage, and that counted. But if you would have awarded the Heisman at the end of the actual regular season, Tua would have won it.
I think that, I just think, again, like, what do we I think that we need to think about what we expect from an Alabama quarterback versus what we expect from a quarterback who doesn't play for Alabama, right? Like, but
again, now we're back. This is your year-long argument. This is your year-long downgrade Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, anybody good. Downgrade them because they have good players. That's not changing. So you're just saying you think your fear, your biggest argument, you think gets emphasized even more. The thing you already fight against and don't like is now going to be emphasized more in a world where those teams are in the playoff on the biggest stage, and it's going to be just more of the thing you already don't like is your main point here. Is that right?
That's fundamentally it, yeah.
Okay. It's already exists, but it's going to get worse. Okay.
It's going to get much worse. And I think the other part of it too is that, again, like, we look back now at that receiver group that Tua had, and we're like, oh, maybe that was the best of all time. Like, maybe that was the greatest group of receivers ever. We look back at 2021 Ohio State, and we're like, oh, all these guys are awesome. Like, maybe this was the greatest group in the history of football.
That's not an argument about whether the Heisman should be.
But that's why I feel like we need to contextualize it. You know, Kyler Stone is, he's got, I think CeeDee Lamb was on that team who was awesome. And then it's like, Nick Basquin, like these dudes who like are not that good. And it's just, I think that for us to just be like, well, actually, this is a good example too. We're having this discussion right now where people are like, well, if Joe Burrow beats Patrick Mahomes this weekend, that means that he's the best quarterback in football. And it's like, Joe Burrow's not playing against Patrick Mahomes. Joe Burrow's playing against the Chiefs defense. Like, I hate when we do this, where we try to reduce head-to-head matchups into reflections of how these players actually are. A player is one part of the pie. And to try to draw these giant revelations about what they are in football specifically. I think that we can do this a little more in other sports. Basketball is 5-on-5, for example, right? I think it's a little easier to do that. Baseball, it's a series of one-on-one matchups. I think it's a little easier to contextualize what an individual does. In football, you are one of 11, and being the best one of 11 is great. But I mean, it's just, to me, we can't just go and say, well, this team won the game and therefore this player is better and more deserving. Like, I think that is one factor to take into account in a sport that is fundamentally unfair.
So let's go back to your ballot to finish this up, to make a final point here. So your ballot at the end, when the Heisman votes were actually due, would have been Caleb Williams, Max Duggan, Hendon Hooker. You said your ballot in the postseason would have been Caleb Williams, Stetson Bennett, Max Duggan. So Stetson Bennett moved ahead of Max Duggan if it was a postseason award. Do you think that's a worse ballot by you? Like, why did you move Stetson Bennett up? And do you think in the end that is a worse vote, a worse reality? If that was your vote, if that was how the Heisman finished, that's worse for the sport? That's worse for the players. That's a worse reflection of the narrative of the season. Why did you do it? And what do you think of what you did? What do you think? How dare you, sir?
I think it's a worse ballot that's less reflective of the season, because I think that when you look back at this season, Tennessee was one of the biggest stories of the year, and Hendon Hooker gets hurt and is a complete non-factor, unfortunately, when it's time to put in a postseason Heisman vote. Just a total non-factor. And I think that erasing Hendon Hooker from the Heisman ballot is worse. I think that obviously Georgia was really good, and Georgia was reflective of the season, of course. And so I don't even really as much have an issue with Stetson Bennett being involved, but Hendon Hooker being eliminated is worse, I think. I think that Max Duggan was one of the, from games 1 to 13, stories of the season in college football. And again, I think that Caleb Williams was the most outstanding player in college football.
Why did you put Stetson Bennett ahead of Max Duggan then?
Because quarterback wins. Because I think that's how we would have to look at it. Like,
So I think we understand how it would change. It really is a matter of whether you think it's better or worse. I think a world where the quarterback of the national championship team, who in his final 2 games accounted for a total of 723 yards and 10 touchdowns, I think that not counting for the Heisman is definitively worse.
Sorry, were you talking about Trevor Lawrence there, or were you? I lost track.
I'm talking about the guy. I'm talking about the guy who you're saying the idea of like Hendon Hooker falling off your ballot is to you not a good thing. I'm saying when I voted, not even really thinking about Stetson Bennett, that's worse, because then Stetson Bennett went out and balled out and showed what kind of player he was, and it really mattered, and it really helped this team win. And he wasn't just along for the ride. He's a really good player who should have gotten, as it turns out, not fewer Heisman votes, but more Heisman votes, and would have enough to win. I don't think so. You do think so, even though neither of us would have done it. So in the end, I'm going to, I don't even know what the word is. I'm going to definitely write about this. I'm going to call the Heisman. I'm going to try to talk to people about like, why not do this? I think it should be done for the 2024 season with the move to the 12-team playoff, because it's only going to exacerbate it, right, Shehan? The idea of somebody might come in as a 6th seed and they're playing 4 playoff games and be extraordinary, and none of that counts. I think that's even worse. Like, that's a new world that we have not dealt yet with. We're just talking about how Stetson Bennett had 2 good games. Vince Young had 1 good game, right? Deshaun Watson had 2 good games that didn't count. Do you think it's do you think it's, in your mind, has anything changed about, if a person plays 4 games that don't count, that would change my thought process?
I think that at that point, we really have to have a most outstanding player award. Like, I think that at that point we are like, a most outstanding player of the playoff, because I mean, if to win the college basketball national championship, you have to win 6 games. like you said, there are going to be players playing 3 and 4 games in this. I think that makes it's completely own entity at that point. And like, because the thing is, right, I mean, would it make you feel different, I guess, if they kept postseason stats as a separate thing? Because one other thing too that's going to be very interesting is going to be the idea of like leading the country in passing, of records, of career passing yards. Like this stuff is going to definitely,
we got to work all this out.
Yeah, this part's going to be, I think, actually very interesting how this gets handled.
Or honestly, I think I'd be in favor of handing out the Heisman after the 12th game. Vote before conference championship weekend. What do you think of that?
I think that
because then everybody plays the same number of games. And you know what you're taking out? Team success. Because it doesn't matter if your team makes a conference championship game, which it sure does matter now.
Yeah. I still think I think that, you know, one of the things that happened whenever they announced the 12-team playoff was I was very happy about the fact that winning a conference championship actually earned you something, that it earned you a bye in the college football playoff. Because I do think that when we think about the Heisman too, we do need to think about what exactly it's rewarding. And I do think that college football is a regional conference sport at its heart. Now, if we want to go all the way to making it a super league type thing, then do it. Don't lie and sit here. Like, just say only 2 conferences get to play. Like, just say that. But we are not at that point as yet. There are things that I think the sport is trying to do to slow this down, to make this a national sport that's also a regional sport. But I do think that there is value and merit. And I think that the Heisman Trophy has a unique place in college football lore because it positions itself uniquely. If this was just an award that, that the best player on the best team won every single year, then I don't think anybody would care about it. But that's not been how it's functioned.
All right, so we're going to go at CFB Survivor Show on Twitter. We'll let this pod sit out there for a couple days and try to get people to listen to it. And then we'll put up a poll. Should the Heisman be moved when the 12-team playoff starts? Should the Heisman be moved to a postseason award? So we will get your thoughts on this. If you want to tweet at us at CFB Survivor Show on Twitter and give us your thoughts on this. If we get some responses, we'll read some on our pod next week. This was more, I like when it's contentious. I think we outlined pretty starkly the 2 sides of this. Like, I don't know that there's, I guess maybe someone could be like, I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's a trophy, but it's the best trophy in sport. So if you care about trophies at all, it does matter. And I think we outlined the 2 arguments here on either side of it. So I like that we did that, and I'm going to see if we can move. If we can move it, it's going to be like, hey, Mr. Heisman, it's Doug. And they'd be like, hold on, Shehan's calling. Let me get back to you in a second. Shehan's be like, don't listen to him. Don't listen to him. Don't let him sway you. So that's our discussion. I wanted to do that. That is moving the sport forward. It's a forward discussion. We used this past season as a way to talk about it. And so in the end, congratulations to Stetson Bennett for finishing second in the postseason Heisman balloting. But Caleb Williams still won, at least in our 2-vote thing, even though Shehan doesn't think it would happen in real life. Okay, that's it for this edition of the College Football Survivor Show. We did an Apple show where we did the biggest offseason moves that affect the 2023 playoff race. Garrett Riley, Clemson offensive coordinator, new coordinator hires at Alabama, Sam Hartman in Notre Dame. That was on the Apple show, $2.99 a month. You get a bonus episode every week if you'd like to subscribe to that. But for now, that was a hearty, heated debate, Shehan. Do you like podcasts like that or not? Are you mad at me now?
Little of this, little of that.
See, you are gregarious, and I respect your opinion. So we don't fight as much. We don't fight as much here. So that was probably the best fighting that we had. And honestly, if I could, I would just fight on every podcast I was ever on. So that felt natural to me. Shehan is like, I'm not sure I want to be part of this anymore, but we're glad you guys are part of it. So for Shehan Jeyarajah, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.